Hey guys, it's Pilot in Command here. I'm back for another video. In this video, I'm going to be talking about PID tuning. So what is PID tuning? For those of you who don't know, your PIDs or PIDs are these values in just ignore the helicopter in the background. They're basically values that kind of dictate the feel of your aircraft. And if you're on beta flight, regardless of what version you're using, there's a PIDs tab, and you've got a P value, an I value, a D value. Then you have, on the right side of the screen, you have your rates. So you have RC rate, super rate, and expo. The whole goal of, I guess, tuning your rates and your PIDs is to basically get the quad to fly how you want it. And there's a lot of stuff that you have to get right before you get into tuning the PIDs. And I'm going to basically walk you through the process that I use to tune a quadcopter. So before I get into my whole process on how I tune my PIDs, I just want to walk you through just kind of a simple diagram that just kind of explains what we're trying to do as far as PID tuning is concerned. PID tuning is kind of like this spectrum. You have low numbers and you have high numbers. So let's just say, just for these purposes, low PIDs, we'll say that's, say, 0, and this is, 100. Let's just leave it like that. So the most important value that you need to tune is your P value. So if your P values are really low, the quad is going to feel just kind of loose, sloppy, and not precise. But on the other end of the spectrum, let's say you crank let's say you crank all your numbers to 100, or P value. Let's say you crank your P value all the way to 100. Well, it's going to have lots of vibration. Basically, it's just going to have a lot of vibrations. It's going to feel very twitchy too. So at either end of the spectrum, the quad is unflyable. So what you're looking for in an ideal circumstance is you want to get your PID values right there, somewhere in the middle. And if you were to turn back, go back, a couple years ago, this window of your quad flying well was very small, like this. But as this hobby and industry has progressed, this PID window of what is deemed flyable has gotten wider and wider. So now it's safe to say that kind of right in the middle of these values, right here, this is what is deemed flyable. So modern flight controller software is going to place your PID settings right here in this circle. So it's flyable. It's not going to be necessarily loose or sloppy, but at the same time, you're not going to have a whole lot of vibrations if you're just cruising. Where PID tuning comes in now is basically you're tuning just for feel. So essentially what that means is let's say you're in this spectrum of what's flyable and it starts to feel, loose or sloppy, maybe, over here. Well, then you're going to need to crank your numbers up, but at the same time you don't want to crank your numbers up too high, and because otherwise you might end up in this spectrum and you might get these vibrations that you don't want. So you might crank them maybe to here. So long story short, to wrap this up, you're going to have to tune for feel based on what equipment you currently have on your aircraft. So yeah, it's not like you can just go online. I mean, yeah, you can go online, just like punch in whatever numbers you want, but in order to figure out what works well for you, you have to go out and actually tune it. Now on to my personal PID tuning guide thing. This is kind of just a basic list of stuff that I do when I'm quote unquote tuning a quad or setting up a quad. So setup, I should add tuning. Okay, whatever. So first thing you have to do when you are tuning a quad is you have to have a good mechanical setup. So that means your quad has to be put together correctly. Okay. The next thing after that, once you've actually built your quad in step 1, step 2 is actually going into your radio and setting up your endpoints. So this is going to be a combination of doing stuff on the computer and doing stuff on the radio, because your transmitter, I'm just using this one just as an example. Every time you move the sticks and stuff like this, move the sticks, etc., your quad interprets that as numbers, and depending on what those numbers are, that kind of dictates what your quad will do. So on your throttle, roll, pitch, and yaw, you want these values, and you'll actually see this on the receiver page in Betaflight. You want them to go from 1,000 to 2,000. And what I do personally is you can see your endpoint values, because that's what these are. You can see them on your radio, but the endpoint values on your radio might not match up to what Betaflight interprets those are. So what I personally do is I make sure my quad is, or my receiver is getting power when I have my quads set up on or plugged into the computer, and I just move the sticks around with my radio, and I watch those values change on the on Betaflight's receiver screen. And then let's say the quad goes from 999 to 199 over here. Then it says that on the computer. Then I'll adjust the endpoints until I get 1,000 when the stick is fully deflect. I don't know, I'll just use roll to the left, and 2,000 when it's deflected to the right, and then in the middle right here needs to be 1,500 is in the middle. Now notice I have a line drawn here. That's because these two things right here are basically going to hold true for every single quad that you have or you fly. What comes next, this is all personal preference. So the next thing, after you've got your quad built, you've got your endpoint set up, is you have to pick what firmware you're using. What I recommend that you do is, since I use Betaflight, I went into Betaflight and I found the latest firmware, and that is Betaflight 3.3.0. So that's what I'm using right now, 3.3.0. Now, let's say tomorrow, let's say Betaflight 3.3.1 comes out. I honestly wouldn't upgrade unless you absolutely want to or something like that, because as you kind of constantly update your firmware, your PID values will quote unquote change, or the weight of the numbers in the system will change. So let's say you had two quads set up identical, except one had Betaflight 3.3.0 and your other one had Betaflight 3.2.4 or something. You might feel a little bit of difference in the flight feel of the aircraft, and that's just because of what firmware you're using. So once you have your firmware installed and everything's set up, all your UARTs and your switches, arming, etc. Once you set everything up in Betaflight and the quad actually arms and it flies and whatnot, the next thing you're going to want to tune is your rates. And rates is basically how fast your quad, flips and rolls in the air. If you find that you really like the rates that come stock on Betaflight, just leave it alone. But if you want to, say it flips too slow and you want it to flip faster, then you might want to raise some of these rates. If it flips too fast and you want it to maybe tame it a little bit, then you can lower some of these values. So this is something, again, you're going to have to play with. It's very, this is different from person to person. So after you have these 4 things set up, finally we get to the PIDs. And what I recommend, at least what I did, is Skitzo put out a video a couple years ago. He's tuning a QAVR. It's like 20 minutes. And I'll link it in the video description. And this is really, when you get to tuning this, you are tuning for feel of the aircraft. And how I define feel is a connection between pilot, transmitter, and aircraft. It's not something that I can really explain that well. It's just something you have to get out and you have to try it. And there's a lot of really good resources out there about how to tune your PIDs. So this next option here, this last step, I haven't actually spent a whole lot of time with. I kind of started experimenting with this last night when I used the Kalman filter. That is filters. Now, I'll leave a link to Joshua Bardwell's dynamic filter tuning video because I think that's a really good, the way he talks about this is really good. I don't know a whole lot about filter tuning just because I haven't personally played around with it a whole lot, but long story short, if you jump into filters and just turn off all the filters, then there's a very good chance that you will damage your motors. So proceed with caution when doing this step. So anyway, that's just kind of my path to tuning a quad. I'm going to end the video here. I hope this was useful information for you. However, I do want to end just by saying, if you you do just the bare basics, like you just build your quad, set up your endpoints, download whatever firmware you want, and just get it to fly, and you just like the way it feels out of the box, that's totally fine. Just when it comes to PID tuning, there is no right or wrong. There is not a right or wrong way to do this. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is, do you like the way that your quad flies? If you do like the way your quad flies after you just set it up with just the stock rates and stock PIDs, that's great. But if you don't like the way it feels, then you are going to have to play with things a little bit. So anyway, hope this was useful and informative for you. So anyway, thanks for watching. Have a nice day.